and welcome to my channel. Today I've got a nail art tutorial for you this time. It's again a mid nail art about dragons, so let's get started. Now, to get the technical talk out of the way first, I'm starting off on tips that I buffed to make them more like, you know, yeah, less shiny basically. So both the acrylic actually will grab on better that way, but also the acrylic paint will slide around a little bit less. If you want to do this on your natural nails, you totally can. I would recommend using a good matte base coat, just to make sure you don't have the acrylic paint on your actual nail, because it might stain. And just, you know, go from there. Although if your nails are very short, you will have a more difficult time with this, because, well, the shorter your nails are, the less space you have to paint. And painting on a nail is already quite hard because they're small, so the shorter your nails, the more difficult you're gonna make this for yourself, basically. I always keep the edge of the acrylic bare, because I do want the acrylic to be able to hold on to the actual tip and not just acrylic paint, because acrylic paint isn't that sturdy, so I just really want to be able to seal it in well. And then I just paint a very simple backdrop, and then I let it dry completely 100%, just using cheap acrylic paint. By the way, this is just budget store acrylic paint. It's good enough, and also it's cheap, and it comes in very tiny tubes, which is perfect for nails, because if you buy big bottles, they're just gonna dry out, because you're not gonna use all that much if you only paint on your nails. But yeah, anyway, the reason I do acrylic on top of the backdrop is just to give it more depth. If you're using your natural nails for this, you can totally mimic that by, well, okay, you might not get the exact same amount of depth, but you can sort of mimic it at least by putting a top coat, a good thick layer of top coat, maybe 2 coats, on top of the backdrop, and then buffing the top coat a little bit. You will get depth that way. And then to make the image stand out even more, I'm going to do a white base first. So basically this is just a, yeah, like a primer for the rest of the paint. Just basically the shadow of the dragon, but like a white shadow instead of a dark shadow. And also letting that dry completely, like seriously 90% of the time you'll spend on a nail art is, well, waiting for the paint to dry. Because once the paint is dry, it's not going to blend anymore together, and the white is just going to really act like a canvas. So that's the idea. And yeah, this is actually not inspired by any particular type of dragon. This is mostly just inspired by, I wanted to do a red lava-like backdrop, and then I wanted the color of dragon that really stood out. So because red is a warm color, I decided to go for blue, because that's a very cool color, so it contrasts nicely, so it really pops out. And that's how I ended up with sort of a snow dragon. Yeah. And the stories about dragons, well, I am going for a European dragon. Like, okay, let's just have some backstory here. As a teen, I was the sort of gothic, very alternative type of person. I really loved the whole aesthetic of dragons. Like, I had necklaces, rings, bracelets, that sort of stuff. T-shirts with dragons on them. I loved it all. I still have actually some shirts with dragons on them, come to think of it. Anyway, and I've always preferred European dragons over Asian dragons, just because, and what this says about me, let's not get into that too deeply, but Asian dragons are usually more linked to spirituality. I feel like I'm pronouncing that really weirdly, but anyways, and luck or wisdom, that sort of stuff, while European dragons are mostly like linked to breathing fire and eating people. Yeah. I don't know, they're like more, I don't know, like they're more like basic primal animals, and like less like spirits, basically. I make myself sound really violent, but I'm actually a nice person, I promise. Anyway, so yeah, and there's heaps and heaps of like legends about dragons within Europe, so yeah, here are a few highlights. There was once a sorceress in Kiev who had a pet dragon, and also snakes and other like lizard-like creatures as pets. And she also had a very nice hobby, allegedly. Yeah, she used to seduce well-known dragon hunters of her time, and then she would turn them into cattle. Yeah, the book that I have here doesn't say if she fed them to the dragon, but I'm kind of assuming that she turned them into cattle in order to feed them to her dragon. Because, you know, what else would be the point of it, I guess. I mean, you gotta feed your dragon if you have a pet dragon, right? So yeah, she did actually not end up very well though, because one day one of the dragon hunters actually seduced her and then waited till her pet dragon was nowhere near and beheaded her, because people were apparently in the far past very nice to each other in a very obvious way. Anyway, so yeah, that's quite an interesting one. There's also a legend in Serbia where there was another sorceress, but this one was more of less of a witch and more of a fairy-like sorceress, who was very powerful and could turn herself into a bird. Why that would mean she's very powerful, I don't know. I mean, in the grand scheme of things, turning yourself into a dragon probably would be actually more useful than turning yourself into a bird, but she could turn herself into a bird. I mean, it was probably useful for something. Anyway, she also had a mortal husband, and she also had a pet dragon, which for some reason she didn't like actually care for nicely, but she kept him in a dungeon in the basement of a castle instead. And then one day, somehow, her husband managed to set free the dragon on accident. I don't know how you managed to do that on accident, but he did. And then he, well, the dragon, you know, escaped, obviously. Grabbed her, flew away to the cave where he was probably taken from. I was looking for a different word, but I can't remember the word. Anyway, point is, he was taken from a cave probably, and then he took her there and he kept her there for a couple of months until her husband somehow managed to get her back and probably had to sleep on the couch for the rest of his life as a punishment. Like, how do you accidentally set free a pet dragon? And why would you keep a dragon in your dungeon in the first place? Anyway, the story doesn't say that, but that's another legend about dragons. Then in France there was a dragon that would roam the countryside for humans, like male humans, like the whole like reckless adventure types of people. The dragon was female, by the way. That's important for the story, because the whole point was she was also a woman, and then she would seduce them and kiss them as a woman. And they die. There is really something with like woman and murder and dragons. That is just a thing apparently. So yeah. And of course there's also the well-known stories all around Europe of girls getting captured by dragons and then saved by princes or like knights or other handsome fellows. And then they lived happily ever after. But those were never really my favorites, because I don't know, why would you kill the dragon, you know? Like, dragons are cool. So yeah. I sort of prefer the story where the girl is like, no, I don't like you enough, I'll stay with the dragon. Anyway, but yeah, I guess those are the most well-known stories, just because like the whole happily ever after thing is more easy to tell to kids rather than to tell them about serial killers. Because you don't, like, I suppose like it's just like you sort of want your kids to be like, okay, I want to be a hero too, and not like, hey, I want to be a serial killer too. I can understand that, but still, the serial killer stories are more fun. So yeah, that was basically a tiny little scope into the legends of dragons around Europe. About the painting, by the way, just some other technical talk. What really makes the difference, in my opinion, of a flat painting and a more lively painting is shading. If you want to do soft shading, you better do it while the paint is still wet, because like I did with the white and the blue, you can still blend it. And the scales of the dragon, well, you could totally try to do individual scales, but you'd probably need a brush with literally one single hair and a whole lot of patience. I have neither. Especially the patience would be very hard to just, you know, acquire randomly. So what I did instead is just stippling on dark blue paint when the paint is not dry, but also not very wet anymore, just kind of tacky. And then dabbing over it while I have my brush cleaned off and just sort of mushing it around, so it sort of becomes this scale-like texture without actually having to paint every individual scale. And also make sure you sort of fade it out towards the head of the dragon, because if you paint scales there, you're just going to distract from the face of the dragon. Which would be a waste after spending all that effort on it. Then for the outline, again, you want to be very careful, because black paint is usually very pigmented, and if you get it, well, in places on the dragon where you don't want it, it's going to be very difficult to fix. If you accidentally get it on the outside, like if you accidentally make the line too thick, you could probably still fix it with a little bit of water and a Q-tip. Or just make it look like a shadow, whatever. But just make very sure you don't accidentally smudge it over the dragon itself, because you can't, you know, you can't remove the black paint without removing the blue paint, so keep that in mind. So yeah, and also make sure, that's really just basically the same warning but more specific, to not have too much paint on your brush, because you are going to get weird spots if you have too much paint on your brush. You really make sure there's only just enough paint on there to make a line, but nothing more. And also, I've never encountered a black paint that is not pigmented, but yeah, if you're using a brand you've never used before, do check first, because you don't want to have to go over the outline twice. Going over it once is like nerve-wracking enough. You don't want to do that to yourself twice. I mean, maybe you do, I don't know, but like I don't want to, so I just want to go over it once and be done with it. And the outline also really helps to make the image pop out nicely. And then after everything is dry, it's time to also do some highlights. We'll do that once I'm done with the outline. And then you can just top coat it with either a gel sealer or a regular top coat. However you seal it though, always make sure, also with the backdrop before you put the fresh acrylic on, make sure it is 100% dry, because any moisture you seal in is going to stay sealed in. You don't want moisture sealed into your nail, so make sure it's completely dry. Like, let it dry for hours if you have to. Just make sure it's dry before you seal it in. And yeah, then we have the final results. I actually quite like how this turned out. I hope you enjoyed watching this video. If you did enjoy it, please click the like button, it would really help me out. And if you want, you can also subscribe to my channel. For now, as always, thank you very much for watching, and I hope to see you next time. Bye!